Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Let's Slow Down podcast. I am so thrilled to welcome our guest today. Joshua Becker is here. So, a huge welcome to you, Joshua. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
It is my pleasure. You have such a soft, gentle, welcoming voice. Do I need to slow down my words a little bit today? Would that be helpful? I'll try my best.
You're perfect. Thank you for the compliment. I am just so honored to talk with you today. You have truly been one of my biggest inspirations in my journey of slowing down and simplifying my life and, really adopting this lifestyle, which it is. It's a lifestyle, right? And I've learned so much from your books. I've especially loved your most recent, Things That Matter. I have the Kindle version and I highlight things and I'm like kind of highlighting the whole book. So it sort of defeats the purpose. But there's a lot of good quotes that I pulled. I'll probably mention some of them today.
I'll just mention the Kindle is really fun because Amazon will show you what are the most highlighted passages in a book,
Yep.
and it's brilliant. I love it. So
I love it
apparently your
too.
whole book is highlighted. So
Yeah,
you just
not as
added
helpful that
you
way.
just added +1 to every other highlight that's ever been
Yeah,
ever been done.
the whole transcript pretty much. And I love you can go back and read your highlighted sections, it kind of
Yeah.
pulls all the good stuff out. So it
I
is.
should go back and look at the points you don't highlight. Now I'll know not to put in the next one. Okay, sorry. I shouldn't cut you off.
No, no, not at all. So funnily enough, the other thing that's cool when you have Kindle copies is that I noticed, I think it was your first book, Simplify from 2014. I noticed that I had purchased that in 2014 as well. And that was really at the beginning of my, and I wouldn't have remembered when I bought it, but Amazon actually says, like, you bought this on this particular day. And for me, that was when my youngest, my third child, was 6 months old. And I'm thinking back to that time in my life, and, you know, it was a lot. Like all of a sudden, I have these three babies under the age of 6. And of course, I started turning to like simplifying and slowing down, my version of minimalism. So I thought it was pretty funny that or extremely appropriate as to that. That's when I first started reading your book. And, I found you. And you've just been such an inspiration. You've helped so many people. You are famous for your blog, Becoming Minimalist. It's huge, over 1 million readers a month. There's so much helpful content there. Your course, I've taken your course. So your story, I know a lot of people talk about this when they interview you, but I have to mention it. Your story, you always mention cleaning out that garage with your son. I think he was like a toddler or 5 years old or something. And it's always stayed with me because it's something honestly that we can all relate to. We've all been there and it's kind of embarrassing, but I actually do have that on my to-do list, my family's to-do list for like now that the weather's turned, we're tackling our garage soon. And I was thinking, even before I knew we were going to talk, I was thinking back to you and that scenario that you described. So I thought for our listeners today, can we talk about that for a minute? And if you can just share your story and how you how you came to be becoming minimalist and live the life that you do.
Yeah, it is such a powerful story, and I am so thankful that I have it because I think it illustrates the rationale and the deeper meaning behind minimalism so well. This would have been 16 years ago. I was living in Vermont. My son was 5 and my daughter was 2. I live in Phoenix now, so I don't get these anymore, but had this long winter in Vermont as I always grew up with. And so, very typical in the spring, I would clean out my garage. Um, I had, I was living what I just call a pretty typical middle class suburban life. I wasn't missing any meals, but we weren't eating at the fanciest restaurants either, like pretty much squarely right there in the middle. Seemed like I guess by then it had been 10 years of marriage, a couple pay increases led to a couple bigger houses and just more and more stuff. Anyway, um, so Saturday morning, Memorial Day weekend, I went out to clean out my garage just from the winter. My son was 5. I had this vision of my son cleaning the garage with me and us having this bonding time. But he lasted about 30 seconds and he was in the backyard wanting me to come play catch with him. I said, no, I can't. I need to clean out the garage. So I'm working on the garage. He's in the backyard. One thing leads to another. I'm working on the same space for like hours. Um, it was my neighbor. Her name is June. She was in her 80s at the time. She was doing all of her yard work. I think noticing what was happening on my side of the hedge, probably reliving that moment in her life a little bit
Yep.
where my son keeps begging me to come play with him and I keep pushing him off as I'm working on this stuff. Anyway, at one point we strike up a conversation. I start complaining a little bit about how much had gone into my project. And she said, that's why my daughter is a minimalist. She keeps telling me I don't need to own all this stuff. And I remember looking at the pile of things in my driveway that I'd pulled out of the garage. And I would have said, just like everyone else, that my possessions weren't making me happy. I'm not looking for happiness in my possessions. But in that moment, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my 5-year-old son swinging alone on the swing set in the backyard where he had been all morning long by himself. And suddenly I had this further realization that not only were my things not making me happy, but all the things I had accumulated were actually taking me away from the very thing that did bring me happiness in life. And not just happiness, but meaning and purpose and fulfillment and significance and joy, like all the things that we want to define our lives. And so that was the moment, and I think that's the light bulb moment for most people um, when minimalism starts to make sense. It's almost everyone would say, I'm not looking for happiness in my possessions. My possessions aren't making me happy. But it's something very different the moment we realize that all the things we've accumulated and all the things that we're chasing might actually be taking us away from happiness and joy and meaning and significance. And in that moment, intentionally owning less starts to make sense.
I love it. It absolutely does because it's true. We ask anybody that's, oh no, I'm not looking for happiness at Target. We don't think that way. But when you look where you're spending your time and your energy and your mental stress, which I want to talk to you about, a lot of it kind of comes back to our stuff or some form of it, some sort of lifestyle. And I think everyone listening can relate to that story and to that sentiment because we've all been there. All of us with kids, you know, we've all been there, and we want it to be different. And I think that on this podcast we talk about this stuff a lot, and I talk about slowing down to really recognize like what are the distractions and what does mean the most, and along the same lines here, and simplifying is the common denominator I have found. It's sort of the answer to like so many questions and so many stressful things, and just taking that time out, to just sit back and give yourself a second to reevaluate. So we're all, I think, this is all resonating with everyone today. And so you had this epiphany in your garage, and I think the thing that I have struggled with a bit, and I know a lot of my listeners have as well, is they accept this. Like, yep, this makes sense. I think I want to own less. I'll have more money. I'll have more time, all these things. So it's the how. And I try to talk about this a lot, like practical ways that a regular family who is exactly in the situation you were back in Vermont, 16 years ago, it's the how. It's like, how did you start doing it all? And I know that I believe you started your blog very soon after that moment, right?
That was a Saturday that I was introduced to minimalism, and yeah, I started becoming minimalist on Monday.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, days later.
Wow. So, can you talk to us about like what was going on in your head, and like what kind of conversations were you having with your wife? And I know your kids were kind of little, but they were noticing. They're always watching, taking it all in. So, like what did you start talking about on Monday? Just like I learned a new thing, minimalism, and I'm going for it. Like, how did that start in that couple of days?
Well, it actually started that day. I was in right away. I don't think I had any idea what I was getting myself into. I certainly wasn't expecting this to be a career change. I think probably like a lot of people, I could see that I owned too much and I wanted to own less. I had no idea how much less I would end up owning or how much I would learn about myself or how much I would learn about the world or how much I would enjoy thinking about this and writing about
Mhm.
this and trying to inspire others. So all of that was unexpected, certainly. But in that moment, the way I explain it, and it really is true that we got started right away. I went in and found Kim, my wife, and my daughter Alexa was 2 at the time, and Kim was cleaning the inside of the house while I was out in the garage. Like we were doing the whole spring cleaning thing. And I told her about the conversation with June, and she said, "That sounds pretty good right about now." She was scrubbing her third toilet of the
Yep.
day, and she's like, "I think owning less sounds pretty cool." So we were in, as I recall, as I relive this moment in my life, most of the things went back into the garage. And it was at the end of the day when I pulled the cars back into the garage, because if you picture them, they'd been parked out on the street to do the garage and everything was hosed down. And I pulled Kim's car, a Toyota Corolla, into the garage. And I remember looking around inside her car and there was just all this stuff that didn't need to be there, like coins and pens and toys and water bottles and a glove compartment full of CDs and maps and like just a bunch of stuff everywhere. And so literally the first thing that we decluttered, minimized were the cars. I pulled in Kim's car and took everything out that didn't need to be there. Did the same thing with my Chevrolet Corsica, or maybe we were onto a minivan at the time, but like just pulled everything out. And the next morning I worked and I got in the car and it felt so clean and fresh and calm and peaceful to be in like a car that didn't have anything in there that didn't need to be there. Um, and so that was Saturday, Sunday morning, then work. And I bet by Sunday evening, we were going through the living room. And I was like, how can we apply these principles here in the living room? And started looking for things that we could get rid of and we could remove. So started pretty early. Eventually moved room by room through the home. Kind of that first couple days shaped the way I talk about owning less and talk about minimalism and talk about decluttering. And I always tell people, like, if you're motivated to do this, go start in the easiest space that you spend time in. Like, go declutter your car or the living room or the bedroom. You don't have to start in the attic or the basement or the garage or
Totally.
getting rid of
Yep.
photos or your sentimental things. Like, start in a space um, that you spend time in, that you can like see the end line as much as you can and enjoy the benefits right away and kind of build up that muscle to get to some of the harder spaces down the road.
Yeah, it's contagious because once you start doing that in a space that you frequent often, that's going to really make a difference. I've even found like a junk drawer, like a snack drawer in the kitchen, something that the whole family goes into regularly. They will comment on it. Even my kids will comment like, "Oh, this looks better," and even
Mhm.
though it bothered me before, it hadn't bothered them at all, but now that now you can find things and actually see what's in there. Oh, this looks a lot better, and they start to realize that and try to lead by example as much as possible. Um, it's true, and I know you've
In
written books to help with that.
in our house, and I assume it's pretty common, pretty typical. This isn't always typical, but my wife and I were on board. Like we both wanted to do the decluttering. I was the one passionate about it. I was the one driving it. Some couples, like one person wants nothing to do with it, and those can be a little bit trickier. But um, I don't know how often it is. I think usually there's some agreement that I'm in. There's just disagreement about what we're going to get rid of and how much we're going to get rid of. But I was certainly the one most passionate about it, driving it, and I was okay with that. Some people really are like, "How do I get my husband on board, and how do I get my wife on board?" And um, do your own stuff and be the one who's kind of moving your family in that direction and take the lead and set example and um, wait for them to come along if you need to. But it doesn't have to be both people as excited at the same time. I think that's how relationships work, right? One
Yeah,
person
yeah.
learns something and shares it with the other and benefits the family by implementing it as best they can.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not exactly on the same page in this house, but definitely all moving in the same direction. So I think, I always say that about minimalism, that it's just the kind of thing that it really is it's not a one size fits all. It's super unique for each person. We all operate so differently. We all think so differently. And I feel like I just find so much clarity. And I know you had spoken a lot about that. Actually, I found the quote. Sometimes I can't find the quotes that I'm thinking of, but here we are. You said minimalism is an investment in clarity. And mentally, it's the difference between a lantern and a laser beam. And I love that. I have found that to be the case for myself.
Yeah, minimalism really helps us see life in a new way. I forget the specific place where that quote would have laid, but what it makes me think of is how minimalism really forced us to define our values and define what was important to us. And the way I always say it is we couldn't decide what to get rid of until we knew what we needed to keep. And we didn't know
Yeah.
what we needed to keep until we knew what we want our life to be about and what we wanted to accomplish and what was going to be important to us. And so minimalism in a lot of ways forced some of those questions upon us. Um, and then certainly just removing of the clutter from your home and life and shelves and drawers and closets and pursuits and passions and um,
It's like all the noise, I kind of
yeah,
equate it, and it's funny because I am a music teacher, so I look at clutter as noise, and I just feel
yeah.
like just removing all of that noise and distraction helps so much. And even if, I have a space where I can go, where I kind of do my little morning routine, a little Bible reading, and just a little bit of quiet time, and it is a simple space, and I try to keep it that way because I think clearly that way. And I'm not going to force everybody else in my house to have everything quite as simple as I prefer, but I try to, control what I can and make those spaces that are going to really impact me, make them feel that way. And it really has made such a huge difference. And I think that quote had come in your book, Things That Matter, talking about possessions and just, you know, ways that possessions distract us from things that matter. And I think it really is. They just become noise and we don't realize. We really don't realize. And like thinking about, our closet, if we have just so many clothes in there, we might not realize that that's stressing us out in the morning. But once you pare it down, have a little bit less, oh, my day started a little bit calmer today. So it's like there's all these little side effects of it that add up to be, I think the little stuff's the most important, to be honest. And they make such a big difference. But I have felt this to be so powerful. So, um, you know, can you talk a bit about owning less and just the benefits that you and your family have experienced?
Oh, yes, so many.
Some of your favorites,
It was
maybe.
it was really again, maybe I look back on what I'm doing now. And so I was a pastor for 15 years and loved doing that and thought I would do it for the rest of my life. Looking back on all the little different steps that got me into doing what I do now, which is write and speak about minimalism full time. I've done that for the last 11 years. Like all these things that happened that I didn't force or um, push. Like so many bloggers can't wait to be full-time writers. And like, I don't know, I kind of like my job. I just kept growing and had to make a decision at some point. But anyway, that's a long, a long way to say my focus on the benefits of minimalism is one of those that I never set out when I was blogging to say, I'm going to make this big, long list of benefits. But as I was looking for things to write about, every time I noticed a benefit coming into our lives because we own less stuff, I would just take a moment and write about it on this new website that I had started. And I ended with like over 20, and I could probably keep going on if I hadn't stopped adding to the list. But so things like we had more time for things that matter because we were spending less time cleaning and organizing. We had more money because we were buying less stuff. And more money means different things to different people. If you need to get out of debt, and get you out of debt. If you need to get ahead financially, you can get ahead financially. If you want to give more, minimalism can help you give more. Like it, no matter where you are on the financial scale, minimalism can benefit you. Less stress was in our lives. I found that we had more focus in our days. There was more peace and calm in our home. Found that we were able to focus more on experiences and memories as a family than just accumulating possessions. Um, Found that I had interesting. I was less tied to my past. Is kind of how I
Hmm.
explain it.
Hmm.
I love my past and I'm thankful for it. I'm just not moving in that direction. Like I think we honor our past best by learning what we can from it and the people in our lives, and then moving forward to be the best version of ourselves in the
Yes.
future. And there was a bit of removing some of those things from past seasons of life that freed me up to go make the most of the rest of my life. Um, More generosity, more gratitude, more contentment. Started comparing myself less with other people, at least in terms of physical possessions. Better life for the environment, able to own higher quality things. I don't know. I could go on and on, it seems like. But yeah, I sum it up as minimalism meant that I was freed up to pursue my greatest passions. And that is what minimalism does. And people are going to define that differently.
Mhm.
For me, it was faith, family, and making a difference in the world. And minimalism freed me up to do all three of those things better.
I love that. I think that minimalism equals freedom to me as well. Just freedom from a lot of those things. And it's interesting you mentioned that your past, and I know you talked about that in you've talked about that in your books. And I think it kind of goes along with autopilot. And I know that I that was one of my wake up calls with like the slowing down and just kind of pausing for a little bit because I realized I was on autopilot, not intentionally, which is basically the definition of autopilot, but as life just kept moving forward, doing that next right thing and all the things you think you're supposed to do because, whether it's the way we're raised or just what society tells us, we all know what they are, okay, well, this is the next step. This is the next step. All of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I did all the things I was supposed to do, and my life's actually pretty great. I'm very blessed. Why do I feel like I'm drowning? And I realized it was just too I was it was too much and it was going in a direction that I wasn't intentionally really trying to go that wasn't serving me, at least who I was now. Because I think we forget along the way if we are going too fast and if there's too much of all the things, we can get lost in that and don't really know, well, what actually does bring me joy or what does matter to me? Because that can be a super complicated, challenging question. It seems so simple when we say it out loud, but I think a lot, if we go up to a lot of adults, what matters to you? They might be able to answer a couple things real easily, and then it gets hard because there's all this stuff.
Yeah, and we have very much a like a human tendency to add more and
Yeah.
more and just keep adding to our life. And
It's like we think
um,
that that's what success is, but we have
yeah,
to redefine that a lot of times.
yeah, and we kind of missed the point where adding things that didn't matter have kept us from things that did. There's a point
Yeah.
where we're adding things that contribute and add joy and purpose, and then um, but when you add too much, then it starts keeping you from purpose and
It
joy.
definitely does. So as your kids got older, I'm kind of curious to hear how did you maintain this as they went into those teenage years and with stuff, with especially like I know you have a daughter too, like clothes and things like that, but also with like the calendar and that piece of it because I know that's something that was really kind of a big part of it for my husband and I is that our kids started to get involved in stuff and I mean parenting is like the ultimate competitive sport these days and you have to be in all the things or the kids feel like they're missing out or the parents feel like they're missing out we got over that pretty quickly but it can just be a lot like picking and choosing and then also really we try to model what we think is important and what our values are as a family to our children. And I think that that's our job as parents everywhere. And it can be really tricky. And, what we can work really hard to make things really clear here in our home where we can control it. And then it's like, you send them to school and you go out in the world and you go to work and you're just bombarded by all of these different messages with actual stuff and also like the commitments, like the calendar and all of that. So how did you guys navigate that with your children as a family?
Well, I don't certainly think that there's any one size fits all way to navigate it. I think probably for us, and maybe this is probably applicable to anyone. Just how you going to play it out in your life? Um, so for us, I think we were very clear on what um, how we wanted to raise our kids in terms of what we wanted to be spending time on. I don't know if I'm articulating this very well. Um, like church was always going to be very important to us, and I wanted to be involved in church, and my wife wanted, and we want our kids to be involved in church. Spending time together as a family, dinners together was always going to be something important to us. Going back home to visit our families, spending holidays with our families in the Midwest was always going to be important to us. And so I think we started with some of these non-negotiables, the big rocks for the classic jar
Mm-hmm.
illustration. And then all these other activities, sports, clubs, like these are good and these are helpful, but we're not going to allow them to infringe, or once they start infringing on these baseline foundations that we wanted to be true for our family and for our kids, then that's when we had to start making some decisions about what is this going to look like, and
Right.
um, is it becoming too much? There's certainly season of life elements. I guess the more kids you have and the more spread out they are, the longer that season of life looks. Our kids were 3 years apart and just two of them. So high school and middle school were like seven, I don't know, 8 or 9 years of our life
Yep.
as opposed to 15 or 20. And so um, certainly that helped. And certainly there were some busier seasons than others. Our kids are both in college now, and so they're making their own decisions. But I think we navigated it pretty well. I think our kids have always been pretty social and pretty involved in things, and yet I don't know, church and family and extended family were always the primary things, and um, kept that kept that a focus, kept that the kind of the foundation of life. And it's great. I think sports are great. I think clubs are great, and extracurricular activities and all the things that you can learn and grow in, and you learn wonderful life lessons from them. But man, I don't know how much either of those things are helpful if you don't have the kind of the life foundation set first and foremost to add those things on top of.
Agreed. Agreed. When we kind of took a step back from some of those things, when they just started, it's very haphazard and unintentional. Oh, they joined soccer. Oh, okay, now it's 6 days a week for that kid. And now like timeout. They're 6 years old. It's not necessary. But it's like you have to kind of step back as with you do with a lot of things and really look at it like what are we doing here? What's most important? And we did lean into, faith and family are very important to us as well. And I've talked about this before too on the podcast that we found, I was sitting in church one day and we have a really active parish and there's a lot going on. And there were some really interesting ministries that I'd been wanting to get involved with. And I just kept feeling like I don't have time for it. I don't have time for it. And then I thought, well, where is my time going? And I really want to make time for this because that matters a lot. And we have since gotten really involved in a couple and we do it as a family. Our kids are involved. And I think that the foundation that they've gotten from that and the lessons and the fun, like it is also fun. They enjoy these things. I mean, it's doing more for them than a lot of other activities that we could have chosen would do in the long run. And it's shaping them. And it's also really instilling certain values that are really important to us. So it was a really great shift for us, but I found it pretty hard. And I also found it kind of isolating because I looked around me and I was like, well, this is what everybody else is doing. Half the people aren't even coming to church because they've got another sport event today.
Hmm.
So, it's really, that's where I find this can be really hard because it's so worthwhile, so many benefits, but it's like swimming upstream sometimes when we live in like, just the type of society that we do.
It is hard, and there are no easy answers. I think the only thing that we can do is we were intentional and we're thoughtful, and life isn't lived on autopilot. And
Yeah.
like you said, when we're just adding and just doing because that's what everyone else is doing and not giving much thought to it, I think that's when we really um, run into troubles. But at least, I mean, if someone's taking the time to listen to this podcast, like they're putting thoughts into
Yep.
slowing down, and maybe their life isn't at a point where they need to slow down and they can add more. They're just entering this new season of life. But if you're asking this question, then you're probably going to come out on the right side of it. I worry more about people who aren't even asking the question at
Yeah.
all.
True. Yeah. How did slowing down play a role in all of this for you?
Parent wise, or so
However, yeah, personally or professionally or family, or did it?
yeah, so my kids were 5 and 2 at the time, so it wasn't something where they were, in the middle of their high school careers, and I'm just now learning about this and just now giving it some thought. So certainly had some of that benefit. I think for me, personally, and hopefully for the family as a whole, um, I learned in college the value of solitude, the value of kind of pulling back from all the rush and all the noise, and just taking time alone with yourself and your thoughts and your heart and mind and soul and direction. And um, that was a practice that I had gotten away from, I think, as college had ended. And I was starting at a job with a lot of responsibilities, and my kids were young, and um, minimalism hadn't entered my life quite yet. And so I think it's pretty focused on rushing a lot and doing a lot of things, which can still be my tendency at times. But I think minimalism really reminded me of the importance that the culture, society, the world, like all the noise doesn't typically have my best at heart, and they're not all conspiring for my good. Um, and so learning to pull back and really be intentional, not just with the things that I own, but the things I spend my time on. And we only get one life, and we have limited time and energy and money. And so learning to focus those things on the things that matter might be one of the most important skills we can ever learn.
I couldn't agree more. I believe that's how you started that Things That Matter book, talking about regrets people have as they end their
Mhm.
life and looking back. And when we think like we're never going to mention the stuff or, oh, my house was really big or I drove like the newest car every year. And at the end of the day, like for some people, those things can be nice to have, but they're taking us away from what we are going to think about when we're down the road a little bit. And yeah, it's really it's so powerful. It is so powerful, this idea of kind of subtracting, because like you were saying, we constantly are kind of just groomed and taught like more. Okay, well, you get, you know, not ever really having that contentment where you are and being present. I also find it's hard to be present when there's too many distractions and too much going on and too many things in the day, too much stuff around you. But finding that contentment, because right now we only have right now. So it's
Mm.
that present piece. Um, any tips for people that are having trouble like with the busy mind and with just the busy life, like how to get present and how to find that contentment right here, right now?
Oh gosh. You said it earlier, about how we don't even realize, I think, how the stuff around us affects us. And the way I say it is I don't think we realize how great a burden our possessions have become until we begin to remove them. And I just read a stat that the average American spends 2 hours a day thinking about or taking care of um, the things that they own. Like 2 hours a day
Wow.
are focused on physical possessions, which I think counts cleaning and shopping and researching and a lot of different things. So, but 2 hours a day is like
A
pretty
lot of time.
significant.
Hmm.
And you're right about how owning less frees up our time, how the stuff around us, I always say every physical possession takes up not just physical space in our home, but mental space in our mind. And um, if someone has already minimized all their possessions and their mind is still rushing and racing, then maybe that's a conversation for them I'd be interested to have. But I think for most people, how do I stop my mind from racing and how do I just slow down and find a little more calm and peace in my life? So much of that I think can be found simply by intentionally owning less stuff and removing some of those physical possessions. That would honestly be my advice to anybody who came up and said, how do I slow down my mind? I would say start by just getting rid of some of the stuff that you don't need, and see how it changes your
And see. Yeah.
focus and attention and how you view life and the world and how you're living it.
And what's so cool about that is that you can literally go, you could pause this podcast right now and go do that for like 10 minutes and it will make a difference. It's not going to cost you anything, it's not going to take much time, but it could make a huge impact and teach you a big lesson. Because, like you said, sometimes it's like oh, huh, I do feel a little bit lighter right now. I didn't realize it was the countertop that was stressing me out.
Hmm.
And I used to think like, oh, I'm just like, I just have to let it go, and not that you need to be type A about everything, but just just being conscious of not bringing too much in and consuming all of the time has really just like been such a game changer. It's so much easier, and I know my kids have noticed this too, even though they have more stuff than I do. It's just easier to like keep the house in order. Not that it's got to look like a magazine all the time, but oh, somebody's popping over for dinner or something, and it's not like stressful. Everybody can just kind
Hmm.
of put a few things away, or maybe not have to put anything away, and then we can do what is important and have that connection with a good friend or a family member and not feel like, oh, but my space isn't ready, my house is embarrassing or anything like that. So there really are just so many benefits. And these are things that they might not come to mind right away. Like they're like, oh, it's just
Hmm.
stuff on your counter. It's fine. But it's just so freeing. And it's a really important message that you're sharing. So,
Yeah. Well, it's an
um,
important podcast that you're doing.
thank you. Thank you. I'm sure with all your million readers a month, I know that you have a lot of back and forth. People comment, you respond. And what has been, I'm sure that there's a lot of like common themes that come up, especially with people who are coming to you, who are coming to your site, your courses. Like what is like maybe one that you see over and over again, maybe an aha moment or something that people are struggling with that maybe you can give us some pointers on.
Well, the biggest one I hear is, can you talk to my spouse for me? That's probably the biggest one. And I never know how to take it. I think it was like a little family circus cartoon strip or something like very early on in my journey, and it said it's always easier to see everyone else's clutter than it is to see our own. And so I'm a little skeptical every time. I know there are some legitimately where the husband is the problem or the wife is the problem, but most times when it's a stranger on the internet saying, I would do this, except my wife has too much stuff, I was thinking, I don't know. I feel like you probably have too much stuff too.
Sounds like an
And
excuse.
yeah, start with your own
Yeah.
and then come talk to me. Is usually where I want to start. Um, I think the money piece is a sticky point for a lot of people. They're worried that if they get rid of things, it's going to cost them more in the long run, and so they're holding on to stuff because they're worried financially. And I always try to encourage people that you will change your finances more positively than any mistake that you make along the way. Most mistakes aren't actually mistakes. If you get rid of something that you actually need, probably your neighbor has it and you can
Yep.
borrow it in a
Yep.
heartbeat. I think we
Changes
think
our thinking. Like you
yeah,
can borrow it. We don't have to all go buy it.
we think we have to have everything, and we think there's only one way to solve a problem. And
Yep.
minimalism certainly opens ourselves up to that. Whenever someone says, "I got rid of something," oh, just got rid of something I needed. I always ask, "What? Like, what was it that
Yeah.
you actually got rid of?" I got rid of the sweater that well, you had another sweater, did you? But honestly, if someone is like debating financially, the long-term financial benefits of learning how little you need to get by and how your life improves by owning less far outweigh any mistakes that you might make along the way. So trying to help people understand that. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it was a little easier conversation, just personally speaking, it was a little easier conversation for me back when I was just a struggling youth pastor financially, and I could kind of say, no, I'm doing much better financially now than I was before, and now I'm pretty well known and have a big audience, and so everyone assumes that there aren't any financial issues on my end, and so it's interesting how those conversations can be a little bit more difficult now for people to relate. But that was my experience. We started when we didn't have any money, and it freed up more money than we ever thought it would.
It's an amazing story. And you're helping so many people with the things that you're putting into the world. So thank you for the work that you do and any parting thoughts? Oh, I always like to ask people your favorite way to slow down. So I don't want to forget to ask you that.
My favorite way to slow down. Well, I'm in the same worldview as you, so Bible reading is my favorite way to slow down. I also really like running. Seems to be my physical exercise, either running or working out, is always a good way to kind of redirect my mind from whatever it might have been racing on before. So.
I love that. And I will certainly link your blog and your books. We can find you at Becoming Minimalist. Any other places? I mean, that's probably the best place, but anything else that you want to share with how to find you or ways to get involved with you?
Yeah, I think becomingminimalist.com is perfect. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I certainly am involved in a lot of things and always working on something, but everything flows through becomingminimalist.com. So thanks for I'd send people there
Yeah.
whenever they happen to stumble upon this.
And I would also, I would love for you to also mention your nonprofit that you have, because I think that that's really special and important. And I'd love for people to hear what it is.
The Hope Effect is a nonprofit that we started 10 years ago. We celebrate our 10-year anniversary in 2025.
Wow.
Um, it was founded out of me moving into writing books. So I had the blog, and we don't need much to live on. So the blog provided what we needed, and decided to put these into books to make them a little easier to find. And so we took the money from the books and we started a nonprofit called The Hope Effect, and we are changing the way the world cares for orphans, which sounds big, and it is. But here's a short story. We have had research for over 100 years that orphanages, like traditional orphanages, like we picture with walls and a couple adults and kids coming, are actually pretty harmful for children. Children who grow up in an orphanage are um, 20 times more likely to end up homeless, and well, 20 times more likely to end up in the sex trade, 40 times more likely to end up homeless, and 500 times more likely to commit suicide. And so in developed nations like America, for example, we've moved away from orphanages and we use foster care because children do better in a family setting than in an institutional orphanage. And so the Hope Effect works in developing countries that still use the orphanage model to move them into family-based care, because, as we like to say, every child deserves a family. And so that's what we're doing, trying to change the way the world cares for orphans. And my wife was adopted, and so it's always been something that was very passionate to us, and a problem that we think we can play a role in solving. So thanks for asking.
That's beautiful. Thank you. There's just another benefit of what minimalism has offered you and your family and this world.
Mhm.
So, Joshua Becker, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. Thank you for being here.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for doing this podcast. Important work you're doing. I love it.
Thank you.